Welcome to Wales Tech Week 2021. Thank you to our partners. Enjoy the session.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. My name's Andrew Beaney from Box UK. And if we can get to the slides, that's great, thank you. So my talk today is from digital transformation to digital evolution, how to embed change and accelerate value. Before I begin, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about Box UK. We essentially provide digital solutions for a range of international public and private sector clients, mostly fairly large enterprise clients, but we do have a spread. The talk has been recorded. It will be shared after the session. And if you do have any questions, you can ask them via the chat box and we'll pick them up at the end of the talk. All right. So just a quick introduction. My name's Andrew Beaney. I'm Managing Consultant of Box UK. I head up the professional services arm of the business. So I help clients with digital transformations, agile transformations, process improvements, product discoveries, and things like that. You can reach me in a number of ways by LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram, as we can see on the slide. And at the end of this presentation, you'll see some more generic details for Box UK as well. So when we talk about digital transformation, well, if I'd have given this talk, I don't know, a couple of years ago, we'd have been talking about digital transformation in terms of moving your business online and keeping up with new customer trends, away from sort of traditional business and traditional interactions and engagements, more towards online, digital, mobile interactions. But we've sort of come a little way from that now in the last sort of 15 months or so, where we've had an emergency situation globally. We've had a pandemic, and as the chief executive of Microsoft famously said, we've gone through 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months, and that was in the spring of 2020. So a lot of organizations have kind of responded to this emergency using emergency digital responses, and they've brought in systems in an accelerated timescale, and they've done their very best to keep their organizations going and to keep people in touch with each other. But now, hopefully, we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, hopefully, and possibly starting to come out of that emergency situation. So your organization as it stands, it may be starting its digital transformation as it comes out of the pandemic, or you may have a digital estate that is now a bit of a reaction to world events. So the question is, how do you take that starting point and get to a sustainable, effective digital estate and digital ecosystem? And our take on it is that it's good to reinforce some of the fundamentals of digital change anyway. So we're going to talk a little bit about those fundamentals, about what digital transformation, digital evolution could mean to you, and give you a few steps to go through when you're looking at your situation and trying to plan and manage the change that you want to make. So when we say digital transformation, it's going to be personal to your organization, to your context. Usually it has an aim of freeing up efficiencies from old ways of working. And it's trying to make processes and procedures, as seamless as possible for end users, but also middle users, the people that are providing the service to the end users. One of your aims might well be to release your staff away from administrative and coordination activities into more value add activities where they can use expertise and domain knowledge to really help customers and add value to them. But it's not just releasing staff for more valuable work activities. It's also allowing that greater flexibility in working patterns that we've all needed to have and we've all seen and that many will want to retain going forward. And it's about empowering people to have a choice when it comes to working patterns and to be able to offer that choice as an organization with the minimum impact on yourselves, but the maximum beneficial impact on your staff. As we've seen recently, it's been about connecting people. And again, a couple of years ago, we might have concentrated on how you connect with your users and how you connect with your customers. And that's still really important. But it's also really important to connect internally and to maintain your teams and your teamwork and how you build new teams remotely or semi-remotely. And as we know, that's been really, really important over the last 15 months or so. So in essence, we can talk about a digital transformation or a digital evolution as delivering extra value for your users and your customers, about modifying and updating your organization's online channels, whether it's for engagement or whether it's for business itself. We'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes about how you need to align with a modern digital experience and meeting people's expectations. And there are some constraints around digital working, but there's also plenty of opportunities. And you can take that opportunity to look at your organizational structure and ask, is that the right structure for a digital business or digital organization? And again, a couple of years ago, we might have left it at that. But now we also need to account for the digital impact on our colleagues and our staff, and the need to look after ourselves, our colleagues, from their mental health, but also in terms of end users. Anybody who needs to use a digital product really needs to be able to use it and must be able to use it. So usability and accessibility are more important now than probably they've ever been before. So one of your challenges will be to really sort of keep up with people that are not your competitors in some ways. So I'm sure you recognize most of these logos. They're native digital original companies, and they're not necessarily your direct competitors, but they might be competing for the time and attention of people that you want to engage. And even if they're not directly doing that, they're setting the bar for digital engagement, and they're setting the bar for the experience. And a lot of these organizations have pumped a lot of time and effort into defining that digital experience and defining it for you to have to follow, in effect. Again, not only that, but you've got to be able to match or at least be comparable with that level of experience in a pandemic, while there's lots of distractions going on in people's houses if they're working from home, or in the workplace, as per usual. We've mentioned it before, it's worth mentioning again. We want to be able to give people the option to work from home, but as tech leaders, we must give the ability to work flexibly and effectively, but also the ability for people to say no and switch off for a while. So when you're planning your digital evolution away from this sort of emergency situation, that's a very important thing to look at as well. Okay, so you might be starting your journey for digital transformation, or you might be trying to stabilize what you already have. Some of the challenges are very similar, and at a high level, the fundamentals are really very similar. And the first thing to note is that it's not a textbook exercise. The textbook for your organization has not been written, and it's something that you need to look at and to understand across a number of different axes to be able to do the right thing and have the right level of digital evolution for your organization. And we'll go on to talk a little bit more about that in the later stages of the presentation. This is very much a change program. So you need to really understand what the change needs to be in your organization and then embed it effectively. And we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about making changes stick. But first of all, you need to find out what needs to change and what doesn't need to change, because you don't want to get rid of the strengths that you already have. How to implement those changes, as we've said, figure out how to make them stick, because there's nothing more annoying really than going through a change program that works for 2, 3, 6 months and then kind of fizzles out because people just go back to old habits for any number of reasons. But you also need to, especially from a business case point of view, you also need to be able to evaluate the changes as you go and to make sure that you are going down the right track at all times. And that will be an iterative process, because you will need to you'll need to be able to see where you're going and make course corrections as you go. So if we talk about a number of steps that we can take into this, we've identified 6 steps, and we'll talk about them as we go through. The first one is talking to people and really getting evidence for what people need to change. Taking that information and identifying where you need to go with it. And once you're on that change, and even before you're on that change, definitely once you're on it, you need to create a buzz, you need to create enthusiasm, and you need to be able to make that sustainable. You need to prioritize what you're doing and do the right thing next. And you need to manage the change to, again, make it stick in the organization and really sort of get the longer term benefits from these changes, but also measure as you're going along to make things normal and then to feed it back and learn from that as you go on. So step 1, talking to people, and really importantly, listening to people. Now, that sounds like an obvious thing to say, but it's really, really important that you actually listen to your users, listen to your staff, listen to all the stakeholders that are involved in this change. So we can talk a little bit about a case study, a recent case study where we worked with NHS Wales, and we helped to streamline and standardize 11 public-facing websites with 3 million users. That's quite a lot of change. It's making changes to key services, and it affects a large number of users, but it affects them in really important ways. So there's a lot riding on this to get it right. And we did this by covering a number of inputs. So we looked at the organizational aspect and what NHS Wales needed to get out of these changes. We spent a lot of time and effort looking at the user inputs, their needs and motivations and frustrations, but we also sprinkled a little bit of good practice on that as well to understand what good looked like in other sectors, and whether there were any things that we could learn from other sectors that we could apply to this and get extra value for NHS Wales and for the NHS Wales users. But the key thing in there is looking around, talking to people, and listening to quite a range of people. So next question is, okay, well, who do I involve with that, and who do I collaborate with? And one of the key things here is to get a breadth of representation. If we were to just have spoken to organizational stakeholders, we'll have got one potential view. We'd have got the view of the NHS organization. If we'd have just listened to the users, yes, we'd have got their end users' point of view, but we would have missed out possibly on some of the good ideas from the organization, and missed out on some of the constraints that we'd have needed to understand to deliver the best value for everybody concerned. So you need that breadth of representation, but you need to manage the different contributions as well as they come in. So from your point of view, you need to understand the different parts of your organization that are going to be involved, and look at their aims. You know, are they all on the same page, or will there be conflicts? And if there are conflicts, how do you represent them? Excuse me, how do you resolve those conflicts or prioritize certain things? The key for this is a lot of collaboration, a lot of communication. What we're trying to do here is generate a shared understanding of what's needed. So we take that breadth of representation. We have people working together, actively collaborating, so that a lot of people can see, you know, other sides of their story. So that it's not just taking a single departmental view, for example, but it's being able to represent a balance of views across that stakeholder base. Now, you know, again, going back to a couple of years ago, we'd have probably said, well, collaboration and communication is best done in person, and that's still probably true. But 15 months of experience has shown us that we can do this really, really well, and do this really effectively while people are remote as well. So having a distributed group of people is not really a good reason to go back to siloed working. There's no reason that can't be overcome. There's a lot of tools and techniques that have matured over the last year or so, that can give a really good close approximation to in-person collaboration. So who do you need to engage with? Well, internally, you're almost certainly going to need to engage with the C-suite, so chief executives, chief financial officers, chief technology officers, the sort of the board level stakeholders. They're the organizational leadership, and they're going to have an integral part in driving the change and leading by example. Then you've got the kind of I guess the middle management, the heads of functions, and these are people that are going to be largely responsible for a lot of changes, or accountable for a lot of changes in a lot of instances. But often you find that this level has some concerns about the changes that you're making. Maybe there's a perception that you're taking some power away from them, or that they're going to have to do things differently for unknown reasons. We'll get into that when we talk a little bit about change management in a few minutes. But we'll also need to engage team members and internal users and the people that we want to actually roll out the change day to day. We'll talk a little bit more about change champions as well and how useful they can be. Externally, you're going to need to talk with your customers, particularly, yes, talking with engaged customers and the kind of customers or users that will already be wanting to talk to you. But there's going to be some effort needed to find the customers that you want to talk to, but don't necessarily want to talk to you that often. They're kind of disengaged, or they don't have time. But they often make up the bulk of a customer base, where they just use your service and they're perfectly fine with it, but they don't necessarily want the hassle of you know, filling out reviews every 10 minutes or anything like that. So you're going to need to figure out how to reach all of that customer base, as well as potential customers, and other partners. And again, you might want to look at what competitors are doing. So there's, again, a broad range of people to involve. Once you've done that, you need to identify where you need to go and how to do that. Well, there's a few ways, but we would look at defining the as-is situation and look at where you currently are objectively, look at the strengths of your situation, look at your weaknesses, and define the desired end state, the to-be state. You'll get an input from the business, hopefully, with the organizational strategy, and that will drive the to-be situation. But to get from that as-is to the to-be situation, we've talked about the need for collaboration, but there's opportunity then to be innovative and look at different ways of working on the back of this sort of digital change and digital evolution. So if you've been running particular team key set pieces over Microsoft Teams, and it's been a sort of a quick substitute for an in-person meeting, you can look at that meeting, you can look at that process, and you can say, well, all right, is that actually optimized now for the digital situation? Can we make improvements to the process and the workflow and the agenda to take best advantage of this of doing this digitally? But when you arrive at your to be situation, yes, you'll want to express that in terms of particular themes, potentially projects, but also it's very, very useful to define meaningful goals, objectives, and metrics to measure how well you're doing, and to keep measuring as you go forward. What we're really talking about is gaining a shared understanding, not just of that as is situation, but of the to be situation as well, and to be able to understand both ends of the journey. Because if you can't understand both ends of the journey, then understanding the tasks you need to carry out that journey will be a lot more difficult. Step 3 is to create a buzz and sustain enthusiasm. So if we're looking at a digital evolution, then you've already undergone a lot of change in the last 15 months. So what's going to be the appetite for more? Oh, well, you need to be able to build on the strengths that you've got, but you need to create that buzz that actually we're going to be looking at a particular way of working, and it's going to be sustainable for the long term. We're coming out of this sort of emergency mode, and we want to make that as comfortable and as practical and as effective for all the people that are involved. So it's really important to find champions that can lead your change, champions not just at the top level, because yes, you need top level leadership to drive change. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. You'll need people on the ground who are actually doing this, who will be able to report the day-to-day successes and build the case for everyone else to follow with that change. And those are the kind of champions that that we're looking at. Why is that really important? Well, this is a well-known model called the Rogers model, and it describes how people across pretty much every organization react to new ideas and change. So you'll see on the left-hand side, you've got a section of people called innovators and early adopters. They are, generally speaking, quite pro-change. They are keen on looking for new things and trying out new things to try and get an edge, to try and make improvements. But the rest of the organization, the early majority, the late majority, the laggards, they will have a sort of a gradually increasing resistance to change. They're going to want to see proof that a change works. They're going to want to see proof that it works for them. And sometimes when you get to the laggards, you've just got people who may not want to change at all. And you've got to understand that. You've got to see what that means for your organization. So to put that visually, around about 15% of your organization, generally speaking, on average, will be some form of change advocate, whereas around about 85% of your organization will have some sort of resistance. So when you're planning this change, when you're executing this change, and when you're supporting this change, it's really important to understand that there's 85% of your organization that will have some reservations to varying degrees, and you're going to need potentially a fairly long tail of support to be able to support those people, to allay their concerns and to bring them on board. The next step is to prioritize, and particularly to prioritize what do you do next. What do you do first in some instances, but certainly, do the right thing next. Because practically, you're not going to be able to do everything at once that you want to do in a digital transformation or a digital evolution. It's really not practical, so don't try and do everything at once. There's a need to be pragmatic, but maybe a little bit ruthless about what you do and what you don't do, and what you do first. This phrase, I think, sums it up quite nicely. As everything becomes important, everything becomes equally unimportant. So there is a need to really understand what is important to whom, why, and when it's important as well. So another quick case study. We've worked with ATEB, who are a housing association in West Wales, in Pembrokeshire, and they have a stated aim of becoming more user-centric, more customer-centric, as well as a more digital organization. And we worked with them to try and understand what that would mean for their organization, try and help them on that journey to digitize and become more customer centric. And a number of themes that came out for ASEB, and these are quite general themes across housing associations. There are themes like tenancies, rent handling and rent arrears, repairs and plan maintenance, safety compliance, helping vulnerable customers, managing antisocial behaviour. They all have a level of importance and are all in some way pretty critical to the operation of a housing association. But you're not likely to be able to tackle all of those at one go when you're talking about a digital transformation. So you need to prioritize, and you need to pick one or two of those to start first. And it can be quite difficult, but one of the tools that that helped us do that was something called a Boston matrix, and it helped us prioritize those themes. We did that by plotting where we thought, and asking stakeholders to plot the relative importance of each of those themes along this y-axis, along with some measure of their difficulty to achieve. So whether it's time or cost or effort or complexity along this horizontal x-axis. And what you usually find is that you'll have certain themes that are in this sort of top left quadrant, and they are good ones to consider doing first and consider doing early, because you get, generally speaking, a lot of value for a limited amount of effort. So these are the kind of high value quick wins that help build the case and help build enthusiasm for a change. If you find anything in this bottom right hand quadrant, then that's probably stuff that you need to avoid, where you would otherwise be doing work that gives a relatively low level of value, low level of importance and impact, but for quite high effort. So there's probably better things to be spending your time and energy on. The interesting questions then come in these bottom left and top right quadrants, and what you typically get into is a conversation about, well, do I do 3 or 4 themes in this bottom left quadrant, which is relatively low impact but relatively low effort, versus maybe one more strategic project. And one way to look at that is maybe to break down those themes and break down those high level strategic projects. And you can do this by looking at what is the minimum need for each of those themes. What are the happy paths for the users? So, for example, there might be a happy path to get a tenancy in a housing association that is relatively simple, it's relatively popular, and maybe you by plotting and implementing that path, you may satisfy 30 to 40% of your users in total, but you'll get them satisfied early on in the project. So you'll have something valuable, and the users will have something valuable to show for that earlier. And you can take that feedback and that experience of building that sort of horizontal slice through a system, and then carry on by adding further depth to it. So you could look at the next popular alternative paths for tenancies, whether it's a different form of contract or a different form of payment or something like that, and sort of iterate along those, adding those different paths through this particular journey until you've got the right level of the right number of paths then filled out and delivered. And the key thing to note about that is that if you were to develop all of the sort of the building blocks for each of the paths first, you'd get to 50% of the project, and you wouldn't have a complete path for any of your users to go through. So all of your users would have to wait until the end of the project to get any sort of value. By doing it this way, this iterative way, meeting the minimum needs with a complete path through a system first, you're able to make some of your users happy and give them some value on a digital system sooner than if you did this all in incremental blocks. And that's one way of splitting things up and looking at those priorities. But in general, it's good to remember you've got to do what's right, not what's easy, because there's a kind of an unconscious tendency to pick things, and particularly particularly as a tiebreaker, to do things because they are easy to complete. And sometimes that's a valid consideration, but it shouldn't be the only consideration. And a good tip, and one that is becoming much more open to people to exploit now and to use, is to collect data to help you choose what to do next, to understand what your users are doing online, what they're not doing online, what they're not able to do, to be able to feed that into your prioritization decision. Step 5 is to make it stick. And I'll talk a little bit about, there's plenty of change management models out there. I want to talk about just one that we use as a bit of a checklist, which is called the Lipit-Noster change model. And this model says that you need to have certain things in place to have a chance for a change to stick and be sustainable and take hold in an organization. You need to have a vision. So we talked about the as-is situation, we talked about that to-be situation. So you need to communicate where you want to get to, and you need to have a shared understanding and a consensus that everybody understands what that means. Everybody is relatively happy with what that means. You need to look at people's skills and ask yourself if they have the skills to follow up with that change and to move along with it, as well as the resources, and in particular the time that people have to make the change. So, if you're asking people to do their day job, and oh yeah, and by the way, we've got to change this thing, we're going to do this digital project, and we need you to look after this change in your spare time, that doesn't work. People don't spend their spare time on things like that, and it's really not sustainable. So you need to be able to earmark resources so that people have the time as part of their day job to make these changes. And a really important one is looking at incentives. And this isn't, this is the personal incentives that people involved in the change have. Everybody at some point is going to ask themselves, well, this work that we're doing, this change that we're having to make, what's in it for me? And if your answer to that starts with, well, it's good for the organization, because it's not the right answer. You need to be able to address individual circumstances and personal incentives and be able to see and to convince that person, that individual, as to why it's going to benefit them directly. And finally, on all of that, you can have all of that in place, but if you don't have an action plan and a clear action plan, then you're just going to build a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of sort of pent-up energy, but you're not going to be able to go anywhere. You'll be stuck without this sort of clear next step to implement that change. How do you know when you've finished? Well, you need to try and measure the change and measure the impact. So you've spoken to the right people. You've identified all of these priorities. You've started a project or two, and you've done all of that work. But part of that needs to be, well, how am I going to measure my impact? How am I going to measure the outcomes as I go along? What is it about moving from the as-is situation to the to-be situation that is going to improve your organization or improve your business? Can you identify metrics that will give a summary of that will summarize what those improvements mean? Now, metrics won't be the be-all and end-all, and it won't just be about the numbers, but it will be potentially a good indication and a good alerting system to whether you're executing the change well and whether you're going in the right direction or not. So we can invite some questions at this point. I will summarize before we go into the questions, because those 6 steps are the things that I want to summarize for you. We talked about talking to people listening to people and understanding their points of view to shape the transformation or the evolution. You can use that to identify where you need to go, and you can look at trying to involve change champions across at various levels of the business to try and create that buzz and sustain enthusiasm, and to publicize success to really get people behind it. You need to prioritize what you're going to do first, and we talked about that you're not going to be able to do everything all at once, so don't try. Just do the important things first. We've talked about managing the change, and that's a sort of an effort in itself, but it's a very important thing to keep people engaged with that change, and measuring it and making it normal and feeding back what you've learnt as you go along. So if we do have any questions, then I'd be happy to take them. Okay, I'm not seeing any come through yet. So what I will do is I will just say thank you very much for coming to the talk. Thanks for listening. If you need to get in touch with Box UK, then we've got the email address, the Twitter username, and we're on LinkedIn as well, so you can use any of those channels to get in touch with us. Thanks for your time, and hope to speak to you soon.
Thank you for watching. Rewatch all of our sessions online. Thank you to our partners.